The year is 1876, and the American frontier burns with ambition and defiance. The United States, a young nation celebrating its centennial hungers for the gold-rich Black Hills sacred to the Lakota and Cheyenne. To claim them, the U.S. Army dispatches its golden hero George Armstrong Custer to crush the resistance of Sitting Bull, a Lakota chief whose visions foretell victory against the invaders. On a sun-scorched ridge above the Little Bighorn River in Montana, Custer surveys a valley teeming with life, a sprawling Native American camp, its teepees stretching like a defiant tapestry. His golden hair catches the wind as he raises his hat and shouts, "Hurrah, boys, we've got them!" His voice rings with the certainty of a man who believes he is destiny's chosen. But below, hidden in the shadow of the greasy grass, thousands of warriors prepare to fight for their way of life, led by a leader whose resolve is unbreakable. Reinforcements will not come. In less than an hour, Custer and every man under his command will lie dead, their names carved not in triumph but in tragedy. This is the epic saga of Custer's last stand, a story of ambition, courage, and a collision of worlds that would reshape a nation. George Armstrong. Custer was born in 1839 in New Rumley, Ohio, to a farmer's modest home, but his dreams soared far beyond the fields. A boy with a spark in his eyes and a heart full of fire, he craved a place in the history books. Sharp, bold, and unapologetically proud, he was a born leader, though his recklessness often outran his wisdom. At West Point in 1857, he became a legend of defiance, racking up 726 demerits for pranks, brawls, and rule-breaking, a record unmatched by any cadet before him. Custer's a storm one instructor grumbled, but a storm that could win wars. His classmates, despite their exasperation, saw the makings of a soldier who could change the course of battles. The Civil War was Custer's proving ground. At 23, he became one of the youngest generals in American history, leading his cavalry with a courage that seemed to defy death itself. At Gettysburg in 1863, as cannon fire shook the earth and smoke veiled the sky, Custer led a daring charge into Confederate lines, his saber gleaming, his long golden hair streaming like a banner of defiance. His men, inspired by his fearlessness, turned the tide in a critical moment for the Union. The press dubbed him the Boy General, and his flamboyant-style custom-tailored uniforms, a swagger that filled every room, made him a national hero. When Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox in 1865, the table on which the papers were signed was gifted to Custer's wife Elizabeth, with a note, "No man did more to secure this victory than your husband." Yet Custer's hunger for glory was a fire that never dimmed. Peace felt like a prison. Assigned to the 7th Cavalry to police the Plains Indians, he saw the posting as a slight, a far cry from the battlefields where he'd won his fame. The Black Hills, sacred to the Lakota and rumored to hold gold, became his new arena. In 1868, the U.S. signed the Fort Laramie Treaty, promising the Lakota the Black Hills if they stayed on reservations and ceased attacks on settlers. It was a promise laced with deceit. The government knew settlers would flood the region, provoking conflict to justify seizing the land. On the windswept plains, one man stood as a beacon of defiance. Sitting Bull, a Lakota chief whose quiet strength belied an unyielding resolve. Unlike Custer's brash ambition, Sitting Bull's power was rooted in patience and vision. Named for his habit of deliberating like a bull rooted to the earth, he was both warrior and holy man, guided by visions from the Great Spirit. The white man's promises are like smoke, he told his people, his voice steady as the heartbeat of the plains. They vanish when the wind blows. We must fight to remain free. Sitting Bull's closest ally was Gall, a towering Lakota warrior, whose loyalty was matched by his ferocity in battle. Together they forged a coalition of Lakota, Cheyenne, and smaller tribes, their raids on settlers and rival tribes like the Crow and Arikara, a warning the Lakota would not surrender their way of life. In the shadow of the Black Hills, Sitting Bull's vision grew stronger. During the sacred Sundance, he saw soldiers falling like grasshoppers into his camp, a prophecy of victory that rallied thousands to his cause. Another warrior emerged as a force of nature, Crazy Horse, a young Lakota whose fearless spirit seemed to defy the laws of war. His name, born from visions of a wild horse, untamed by any rider, reflected his relentless courage. "We are the last free people," he told his warriors, his eyes burning with purpose. "We fight not for glory, but for our children's future." With Sitting Bull's wisdom, Gall's strength, and Crazy Horse's audacity, the coalition became a storm gathering on the horizon. In November 1868, Custer saw a chance to reclaim his glory. Tracking a Cheyenne camp along the Washita River in Oklahoma, he led a dawn raid, his cavalry sweeping through the snow-dusted village like a scythe. The attack was brutal. No 3. Cheyenne, mostly women and children, fell to bullets and sabers. Custer hailed it as a triumph, his name splashed across newspapers as the hero of the frontier. But the victory was a stain on his legacy. The camp belonged to Black Kettle, a chief who had sought peace with the U.S., making reconciliation with the Cheyenne impossible. Worse, Custer's ambition blinded him to the consequences. His second-in-command, Major Joel Elliott, and 20 men were cut off pursuing fleeing warriors. With nearby Cheyenne villages mobilizing, Custer withdrew, leaving Elliott behind. Weeks later, Elliott's mutilated body was found along with those of his men, sparking outrage in the 7th Cavalry. Captain Frederick Benteen, a grizzled officer with a sharp mind and sharper temper, was livid. He penned a letter blaming Custer for Elliott's death, which leaked to the press, igniting a feud that would fester for years. Custer chases glory and leaves his men to die. Benteen wrote his words a dagger to Custer's pride. Custer, enraged, vowed never to forgive him. By 1873, Custer was stationed at Fort Abraham Lincoln in Dakota Territory, tasked with confronting Sitting Bull's growing resistance. The fort was a cauldron of tension. Major Marcus Reno, a brooding officer whose whiskey-soaked temper clouded his judgment, despised Custer's arrogance. He struts like a peacock. Reno muttered, his flask never far from hand. Yet Custer built a loyal inner circle, his brothers Tom and Boston, his brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Calhoun, and his wife Elizabeth, whose presence at the fort was a rare light in the harsh frontier. A new ally joined Custer's ranks. Bloody Knife, a half Lakota, half Arikara scout with a burning hatred for Sitting Bull and Gall. As a child, Gall had tormented him and later killed his brothers and son in raids. For Bloody Knife, serving Custer was a chance for vengeance, his loyalty forged in blood and pain. "I will see Gall fall," he told Custer, his voice low and fierce. The two men bonded over their shared hunger for victory, though Bloody Knife carried the weight of his tragic past like a shadow. In 1874, Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills, officially to scout for a fort, but in truth to confirm gold deposits. Accompanied by reporters and photographers, the expedition was a spectacle, with Custer hunting alongside Bloody Knife and his brothers, their exploits immortalized in newsprint. Gold was found, and by late 1875, 15,000 settlers flooded the Black Hills, defying the Fort Laramie Treaty. President Ulysses S. Grant saw opportunity in the chaos, issuing an ultimatum in November 1875. Any Lakota or Cheyenne not on reservations by January 1876 would be declared hostile. Winter's grip made compliance impossible, a deliberate trap to justify war. Sitting Bull saw through the deception. In a teepee lit by firelight, he shared his vision with his people. "The Great Spirit has shown me soldiers falling into our camp like grasshoppers from the sky. We will triumph." His words spread like wildfire, drawing 8,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and allies to his cause. Crazy Horse trained his warriors in the hills, teaching them to strike like lightning, swift, unpredictable, relentless. "We are not many, but we are one," he said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared fate. Gall, ever loyal, prepared the camp's defenses, his eyes scanning the horizon for the enemy he knew would come. On June 17th, Crazy Horse struck first. Spotting General George Crook's army along the Rosebud River, he led 500 warriors in a daring assault, outmaneuvering Crook's equal-sized force with hit-and-run tactics. "They fought like spirits," Crook later wrote, retreating after losing 30 men. Crucially, he failed to warn Custer or General Alfred Terry, leaving them blind to the growing threat. Sitting Bull moved his people to the valley of the Greasy Grass near the Little Bighorn River, their teepees stretching beneath the hills like a sea of defiance. There they danced the sun dance, their prayers rising with the smoke binding them to the land they fought for. On May 17, 1876, Custer and the 7th Cavalry marched from Fort Abraham Lincoln under Terry's command, part of a three-pronged campaign to trap Sitting Bull. Terry and General John Gibbon would approach from the north, Crook from the south, and Custer along the Rosebud River. Custer treated the campaign like a grand adventure, hunting with his brothers, and Bloody Knife, his carefree demeanor, infuriating Terry, Reno, and Benteen. When Reno returned from a scouting mission with Sitting Bull's trail, Custer mocked him as a coward for not pursuing it. "You lack the stomach for glory," Custer sneered, his words cutting deep. Terry split his forces, ordering Custer south to follow the trail and wait for reinforcements if he found the enemy. "Don't be greedy," Terry warned, his tone heavy with doubt. "Leave some for us." Custer's reply was a cold promise: "I will not." On June 25th, his scouts spotted smoke rising from Sitting Bull's camp. Bloody Knife, reading the signs, warned of thousands of warriors, too many to fight alone. "We should wait," he urged, his voice tight with unease. But Custer's eyes gleamed with the promise of immortality. With 700 men, he devised a bold plan. He would lead 5 companies into attack from the north Reno, 3 from the south, and Benteen 3 to flank from the west. At 3:30 p.m., Custer crested a ridge and saw the camp, thousands of teepees sprawling 3 miles along the Little Bighorn, the river glinting like a silver thread. His heart pounded. This was his moment. Scribbling a note to Benteen, "Come on, big village, be quick. Bring packs." He waved his hat and shouted, "Hurrah, boys, we've got them!" His men roared, their hooves thundering as they charged down the hill, dust rising like a storm. To the south, Reno's 150 men crossed the river, their sabers flashing in the afternoon sun. Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, led by Gall, met them with a fury born of desperation. Sitting Bull in the southern camp rallied his people, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Protect our families. Fight for our home, Reno." Unsteady from whiskey, ordered his men to dismount and form a firing line. Bullets tore through the camp, striking warriors, women, and children. Sitting Bull sent his nephew to negotiate, but a bullet cut him down. When a shot killed his favorite horse, his calm shattered. "They have shot my heart," he roared, mounting another steed. "Attack them!" Crazy Horse joined the fray, his warriors swarming like a tidal wave. A bullet struck Bloody Knife in the head, his blood spraying Reno's face. The major's nerve broke. "Every man for himself," he shouted, ordering a retreat. His men scrambled across the river, arrows and bullets thinning their ranks as they climbed the steep banks. Benteen, hearing the gunfire, arrived to find Reno and a handful of survivors on a hill. "Where's Custer?" Benteen demanded, his voice thick with suspicion. Reno, trembling, had no answer. Benteen read Custer's desperate note, but chose to stay digging in with Reno as the sounds of battle roared from the north. Custer's charge met a wall of resistance. Thousands of warriors, led by Crazy Horse, poured from the camp, their war cries echoing like thunder across the valley. Custer retreated to a hill, rallying his men. His brothers Tom and Boston Lieutenant Calhoun and others hoping to seize hostages as he had at Washita. But the Lakota and Cheyenne were relentless. Calhoun's company fell first, overwhelmed on what became Calhoun Hill, their bodies strewn across the grass. Custer and his remaining men retreated to Last Stand Hill, surrounded by a sea of warriors. Arrows darkened the sky, bullets cracked like lightning. "Hold the line," Custer shouted, his voice defiant to the end. One by one his men fell, Tom, Boston, Calhoun, and finally Custer himself, shot through the chest and head. Sitting Bull later recounted a warrior's words: "The long hair stood alone like a stalk of corn, with all the ears fallen around him." Benteen and Reno held their hill through the night, their 400 men fending off waves of attacks under a starless sky. On June 26, Terry and Gibbon arrived, and Sitting Bull, knowing more soldiers would come, ordered his people to withdraw. The sight of Custer's 200 men strewn across the hills, some scalped, others mutilated, stunned Terry's forces. Benteen, walking among the bodies, froze when a private called him over. 2 bullet wounds marked Custer's body, one in the chest, one in the head. "My God," Benteen whispered, "it's him." News of the disaster reached Fort Abraham Lincoln on July 6th, days after America's centennial celebration. The nation, drunk on dreams of invincibility, was shattered. Custer, the hero of Gettysburg, had been defeated by savages. Some blamed his reckless ambition, charging headlong into a fight he couldn't win. Others pointed to Benteen and Reno, who ignored Custer's pleas and sat idle as his men died. Few acknowledged the brilliance of Sitting Bull, Gall, and Crazy Horse, who had outmaneuvered and outfought the U.S. Army with a strategy born of desperation and unity. For the Lakota and Cheyenne, the victory was a fleeting triumph. Sitting Bull knew the Americans would return with greater force. "We have won a battle, but the war is not over," he told his people, his voice heavy with foresight. Crazy Horse, his face streaked with war paint, vowed to fight on. "As long as I breathe, I will defend our way of life." Gall, mourning the losses in their camp, prepared to lead the next stand. The greasy grass had become a sacred scar, a testament to their courage, but also a harbinger of the trials to come. In the weeks that followed, the U.S. Army intensified its campaign, forcing many Lakota and Cheyenne onto reservations. Sitting Bull fled to Canada, but the weight of his people's suffering followed him. Crazy Horse surrendered in 1867 only to be killed under disputed circumstances. Gall, too, eventually sought peace, his heart heavy with the cost of resistance. The Black Hills, once a symbol of Lakota sovereignty, were lost to the tide of settlers and soldiers. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was more than a defeat. It was a clash of worlds where the relentless march of American expansion met the unbreakable spirit of a people fighting for their survival. Custer's name, once a beacon of American heroism, became a cautionary tale of hubris, his golden hair a haunting image of a man who chased glory and found tragedy. Sitting Bull Gall and Crazy Horse became legends, their defiance etched into the plains they fought to protect. The greasy grass soaked in blood, and memory remains a sacred wound on the American frontier, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit can rise unyielding to meet its fate. This is the story of Custer's last stand, not just a battle, but a saga of dreams, destinies, and a land forever changed.